Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the third of our Centre for Global Higher Education African Research Futures webinars. This is a dedicated series that we're putting on, and it's been a real pleasure to invite colleagues to come and speak to us from their perspectives on this topic. So I'm David Mills. I am Deputy Director of CGHE. And today I'm delighted to say that we're going to hear from Kudus Adebayo. Kudus is a research fellow in the Diaspora and Transnational Studies program at Ibadan in African Studies. He was also a postdoc at the Carnegie Early Career Fellowship at the Centre of Excellence in Migration Mobility at Witwatersrand in South Africa. He's got a PhD in social development from Ibadan. He's interested in African migration, settlement, belonging, migration health, urban transformations, and today really the topic is knowledge production, and he's going to talk to us about academic migration from Nigeria. Before I hand over to him, there's a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to record this, and we always do, and we'll post it so that if you're missing any of this, you can always listen to it again tomorrow morning, and we'll also post a transcript of the chat function. Now, please, can I ask you all to keep muted if you can during the webinar? No need to have your video on, but certainly have your mute on. And then at the end, I'll ask you to post questions in the chat, and you can then write in the chat function. I'll then ask you to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and you can ask Kudus your thoughts or questions. And we really value this. Is a really important part of these webinars, so we give over half the time to that. So you type your question, and then I'll ask you to say it. Right, that's enough. I'm now going to welcome Kudus. He's going to talk on why are you still in Nigeria? Genealogies of Japa movement and the future of the Nigerian research ecosystem. Kudus, the screen's yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here, and if you permit me, I would like to share my screen. And then to also mention that while going through the presentation, I'm going to turn off my video recording for internet reasons. So apologies if you can't see me. So so I'm trying to put that off. Okay, yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, David. I'm happy to join you today for this talk, and then it is wonderful to be on this platform to discuss the topical issue shaping higher education in Nigeria today. I particularly thank David for inviting me, and then the Center for Global Higher Education at Oxford for hosting this important platform for exchange. So now, before I continue, let me say that in discussing the topic, why are you still in Nigeria, Genealogies of Japa movement, and future of Nigerian research ecosystem, I would like to say that I speak for myself mainly, and you can also take some of my views, the views expressed in the talk as naive, because sometimes when matters related to Nigerian university system is discussed from a critical standpoint, one runs the risk of being labeled uninformed. This is partly why the core of my intervention today are based on positions available in the public domain on which many Nigerian scholars have trashed, except only that I locate these views in a contemporary moment, the moment of Japa, as I like to call it. Now, what is this Japa movement, and how does one make sense of it in the context of Nigerian academia? The Japa movement refers simply to the new wave of out-migration resulting from extreme abjection that has become a feature of everyday life in Nigeria. This particular abjection is associated with slangs such as shege or japa. And when you are afflicted and caught in the reality of this world, the response is to japa or to flee, as Toyin Falola interpreted it. As a lingo of revamped resolution to migrate, Japa's recent popularity and widespread invocation found a most resounding expression on social media when millions of young Nigerians unite around national frustration, disappointment, and declining, or even, if you like, evaporated expectation Yet, paying attention to these to the uses of the word will suggest that Japa is relevant for thinking about the broader material conditions of knowledge production in Nigeria. By this, I mean, to revisit the extant discussion of brain drain, but to also go beyond it, by arguing that Nigerian academia is at another phase of this damaging trend, and to claim that ongoing affliction of Japa resulting from the precarization of Nigerian scholar is a direct attack on the future of research and intellectualism in Africa's most populous country. As you can see in the screenshot to the right, Dr. Oyedele then in the viral screenshot told us there's somehow, that somehow we will all end up in the future. The future, it seems to be implying, is key, even though one is not exactly sure why he bothered about the future meet with students, he has been forced to abandon because of strikes and precarization. Now, what I do next is to provide some information on the socioeconomic context of Nigeria and migration, and then now to follow that with a framing of Japa as a possible new migration dispensation in Nigeria, grounding it squarely in experience and emphasizing its transformative potentialities. I then turn to the Nigerian university system to speak briefly about the state of universities, highlighting some of the challenges confronting the system, and how the resulting degeneration, had crystallized and produced the current precarized Nigerian academia. The struggle to resist this precarity by the academic union is discussed, but also to ask if this asphyxiation of the system is not reaching the point to insist on radical change to revert an imminent institutional social debt. I intend to close the discussion with an autoethnographic reflection on the question, why are you still in Nigeria, as a shorthand to explain the discomfort of being a young scholar in Nigerian precarized universities. Now, to begin, in terms of the context of Nigeria, Nigeria is touted as the foremost demographic giant, of course, and this is for good reason. In 2022, for instance, Nigeria's population stands at an estimated 215 million, and projected to reach 400 million by 2050. Half of this population is under 19 years old, and making Nigeria one of the youngest population in the world. It is politically a federal democracy going through a fourth republic, having survived a series of military interruptions since becoming the republic in 1963. Ironically, the federal democracy is centralized in many respects. If you look at the economic statistics, Nigeria has experienced a significant decline after toeing the path of upward growth from early 2000s. The economic situation is there now, and things have been bad for a while, as this graph shows. National debt to GDP is high and still rising. And despite having the highest GDP in 2021, Nigeria is not ranked among the top 10. It's ranked in a distant 18. Socially, we can also see that poverty rate is high, and the poorest 20% hold a paltry share of national income. Despite having a huge working population, labor force participation remains at 54%. Violence and conflicts caused by banditry, kidnapping, terrorism, communal clashes, have all led to internal displacement and created a refugee problem. Literacy rate is just slightly over 60%, and government expenditure in education has been on a successive decline, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. Now, and because of all these issues, we see a trend in which post-Nigerian independence, this problem despite being always been there, they have worsened over time, and many Nigerians have looked to migration as a way out. The pursuit of green pasture, quote and unquote, emerged as a personal and family life project, with hundreds of thousands of Nigerians leaving the so-called African giants behind. The map shows the multitude of problems, that we are going through right now, and how they serve as drivers of migration of Nigerians and where they are going to. Now, this Japa issue that I want to talk about, I intend to frame it as a sort of like new migration dispensation in Nigeria. But what does it mean? Let me start with Falola again, who said that in his essay, it's about fleeing, to flee. And according to us, according to him rather, Japa does not mean to walk away. it is to flee from danger or a compromising situation. It means fleeing an abusive relationship, an extremely demanding situation, and life-threatening issues. And the king of the meaning, flee from Nigeria. It continues that there is implied and immediate gratification from discomfort to comfort when one jackpass. As you can see from this other Twitter screenshots, those are Nigerians, celebrating leaving the country. But for me, I use Japa movement instead of just Japa. This manner of deploying the word appears tautological, since Japa is on its own suggestive of mobility or movement. Yet, to use Japa helps us to appreciate the transformative and history-defining potentialities of Japa as being experienced in Nigeria today. Moreover, movement in Japa movement shares affinity with another popular Nigerian slang, movement with exclamation mark. This street-level construct is used to connote a somewhat decisive action of departing, leaving a place or a situation or an interaction that a speaker considered necessary to leave alone. In its everyday usage, movement with exclamation mark means I am leaving, or I am taking my leave, or I excuse myself. In some situations of use, still, it can simply mean goodbye. Therefore, Japa movement is a movement of goodbyes. Following the sense so described, I argue that it is a society-wide phenomenon. Already, some people talk of Japa syndrome, sort of like sweeping through Nigeria. This is because, as people at lower level slip into hardship and objectivity, or in another Sakpa, in another word for Sakpa, which of course can turn to Shege, if one is afflicted with it, other sections of society begin to feel and experience it by extension, thus leading to intense desire to Japa. It is in this sense that one begins to understand why groups assume to be comfortable because of where they work and live, and what they earn are leaving the country in droves in the last few years. Of course, this year especially, the wave of Japa in banking and health sector rang loud in the media. By far loudest, however, is the concern about Japa wave in the academia. Even though intellectual migration or brain drain has posed a serious challenge to higher education in Nigeria for many years, Japa fears in the university arose against the backdrop of back-to-back multi-month strikes in which the state instrumentalized hunger and signaled its resolve to discipline and precarize Nigeria's intellectual class. In response, Nigerian scholars are on the move again. They are leaving the academic trenches, quote and unquote. How did Nigerian university, sort of get to this place? How did it arrive here? In what happens next, I sort of like provide some explanation or some information rather on the status of Nigerian educational system. Of course, the first university in Nigeria was established in 1948 at Ibadan with about 204 students. By 1999, 39 public universities have been established, and it is in the same year that the first private university was permitted to operate. Then, the university system grew by 416% since then, as shown in the on the National University Commission website, which listed about 219 universities with ownership spread between the public and the private. And of course, public consists of federal, which has 49, and states that has 59 currently, with private universities owning a whopping 111 of the total. Now, as you can see, in the last 5 years, 38% more private universities were established, followed by the state and then federally owned one. And back in 2017, all of them together, sort of took in about 2 million plus students at both graduate and undergraduate levels. Now, the the Nigerian university system have grappled with many challenges, too numerous to discuss in this short presentation. And the system struggle, of course, with so many issues, is why someone like Aru Shegbe, observed that Nigeria now offers, I'm quoting him directly now, that Nigeria now offers a disturbing confirmation of Afro-pessimism, the violation of academic freedom, and the collapse of university throughout the continent. Moreover, one might claim that most of these challenges, the challenges of the present, have their roots dating back decades, especially well-discussed problem of brain drain. For example, in 1979, Nwoche was persuading Nigeria's brain-drained intellectuals, to return. As you can see from this quote, I'm just going to take excerpt from it. He was saying that as long as we stay away, less qualified citizens on the spot will occupy the responsible positions. Running a government, was saying, is a very complex art. Why then do we want to leave our government in the hands of anyone but the best the country can produce? Now, people left in the early days of the university system as universities were increasingly politicized and work environment became poorer and poorer. The aftermath of the war in late 1960s pushed scholars out of the country. Military dictatorship restricted university autonomy, academic freedom, and the unending structural adjustment program dismantled university funding pipeline. Even though the receiver of brain drains are still largely United States and United Kingdom, the geography of the brain drained, has clearly diversified to include countries in Africa. South Africa, of course, is an indisputable beneficiary of this. What I mean to say, therefore, is that as far as the Nigerian university system is concerned, many of yesterday's problems are still the problems of today. What then, is it about academic Japa? For me, I think that academic Japa, there's no doubt that we have this academic Japa, occurring, which for me I seek to characterize as likely to have a far-reaching and long-term, long-lasting implication on the future of Nigerian ecosystem. And but to also argue that, but this problem in particular intertwines with many issues that drove and are driving, brain drain essentially. But then, I contend that academic Japa is not reducible, to brain drain. As such, conceptualization submits the struggle driving the precarization of Nigerian intellectual class to push and pull framework dominance for decades in migration studies. In this Japa wave, I perceive a brain force away and suggest that a battle to the bottom has been in the making between two forces, the state and the intellectual class. The insistence on the winning side, that is the states, to chaperise the intellectual class is evocative of what the bottom looks like, with Nigerian research ecosystem and the larger society losing out progressively. For decades, the Nigerian state has sought to chaperise, I use that again, or precarize, and drive scholars to Japa by systematically disempowering, dispossessing, silencing, and pauperizing them. While the insistence of the state to precarize the academy defied the logic of good posturing expected in a genuinely developmental state, one can see a process that has taken over 60 years to mature based on the struggle between the state and the intellectual class. Now, here, to really make sense of this, one needs to enter the advent or the emergence of academic labor union. That's the academic staff union of universities. Now, is this a struggle that I want to turn to and to make the point that the competition or the struggle between these two classes, had transform, the condition, the material condition of academics in Nigeria over the years, and we keep seeing the condition, deteriorating with time. Now, of course, the immediate post-independent universities were approached, in Nigeria that I'm speaking of. They were approached as a political project. Regional and ethnic consideration influenced where universities were built. Although the approach was considered, I quote Eribo now, a balancing act of political brinkmanship directed at satisfying the ethnic and regional groups in Nigeria. The same process also contributed to frequent political meddling in the affairs of higher learning. More so, national ethnic politics found expression in university governance because of the close connection between political structure and the universities. National politics interfere with autonomy of these institutions. That's Agbowuro speaking or writing back in 1976. Also emerged in 1978 in response to the contradictions that the politicization of universities produced. As such, the union was often constrained to maintain an anti-establishment stance, challenging the control, for instance, challenging the control of universities and scholars by the states in the 1970s, resisting SAP-inspired economic adjustment in 1980s and dragging the states to address the aftermath of SAP, addressing corruption and resisting military corruption from the 1990s, agitating for revitalized universities, better welfare, and many other issues, from the 2000 forward. Through these struggles, academic union have made incremental gains, e.g. around wage review, around non-imposition of tuition in federal universities. There's also TED Fund, that was advocated for and established, to fund research and infrastructural development and things like that. And there's also incremental growth around having a more improved Universities Act and the rest. But most of these gains, some, of course, are calling them small gains, were achieved through prolonged strikes. As strikes became increasingly centered in academic labor union agitations, the state embarked on a dangerous path of repression. Because these tactics of resistance proved powerful in mobilizing wider population anger against the state, both military and the civilian political elites going in and out of power instituted regimes of discipline that affected the health of the university system as a whole and precarized the intellectual class. And as you can see here, a number of years since 1999, for instance, we see a whooping 1,835 days of strike, which approximately would account to like about 5 years. Now, as we move forward, we begin to see that in using this means of challenging the states, military heads of states targeted and accused academics of disloyalty and partisanship. We can see examples from people like Gowon, who imposed civil service wage on universities back in 1973 and forced academics out of their dwellings. From 76 to 1979, Obasanjo summarily dismissed staff and students and imposed vice chancellors. Babangida, of course, and Abacha took over at different times and arrested and imprisoned professors and violated academic freedom at will. First, under military regimes, the professors, I'm quoting now, Eribo back in 1996, is saying that the professors spend more time off campus trying to survive the harsh economic conditions and less time in the classroom under a dark cloud of penury, terror, and despair. Their lives were made unlivable by proscribing them from activism and disregistering them as a lawful body. In the view of the state, Nigerian scholars are detractors, enemies, and opponents that should be crushed at all costs. They have withered state power to pursue such demeaning projects to, in effect, render Nigerian scholars statutless. Successive civilian regimes adopted the same military playbook in pursuit of aggressive precarization of scholars. It will appear that indeed, more than even the military, Nigeria's civil political class is on a mission to ensure that academics did not thrive economically and socially. They desire to mold a dispossessed intellectual class, a people unable to attain quality social adulthood. As you can see from this screenshot of strike, that happened back in during COVID pandemic, and the recent one that was called off in October of this year, where ASU was complaining about government using hunger as a bargaining tool. Now, for me, this whole competition or contest or struggle between the state and the intellectual class has been what I called a battle to the bottom. And now I'm trying to sort of explain what this bottom looks like, in Nigeria today. Now, in the struggle with the state, there's an argument to be made in support of the view that Nigerian Academic Union achieved some results. Whether the results did not lead to the bottom is another question. The bottom, I'm arguing, is multi-layered and deep. It is where national research ecosystem goes to disappear or even die. And there's no better analogy to make this crucial point than through the cycle of copies, from which the wheel of Nigerian universities has run for the past decades. The cycle of copies contain a dark cycle to represent the original state of affairs. This original state has whitened, with previous waves of exits of the best and brightest mind from the system. The whitened portion in the end could mean a dead research ecosystem. While this end might not occur completely, its partial occurrence alone signifies stagnation. But the whitened board, could also mean an opportunity to start over or to build again. It means that starting with a clean out circle where a more resilient institution can be built from the ground up, and the political, social, and cultural weaknesses associated with decades of decline can be avoided. But what would it cost, to rebuild from the ground up? Is it even possible? Of course, I'm asking, knowing that global and local conditions that shape university system may not have disappeared or even have worsened over time. Issues such as especially the capitalist economy shaping education globally, where talents or so-called global talents movements is more like, if I want to use a word from a scholar, an attempt to poach talents from less developed countries, and then to have these less developed countries, subsidize the more advanced society. And as you can see from here, I'm also using this particular illustration to show that, when academic breaking starts, you begin to see the intensification, occurring, and scholars beginning to leave. And the newly trained one, particularly those who have gone abroad, are refusing to come back. And then they struggle with retention, and this, of course, begins to show. But of course, in the system, you still have the patriots, who are awful, and the best continue to leave, and the second best are being recruited into the system. And then if you move forward again, you see that the patriots are aging out and becoming bewildered. How did we get here? They keep asking, how did we get here? And continue to manage, the second best and try to encourage them to improve. But as time went on, patriots no longer at ease, of course, and they continue to advise second best product of second best of the second best of the second best to leave. And of course, we see the final end where institutions continue to struggle to recover, and patriots, work against knowledge wastage, share regrets, and of course, tell their best students again to leave. Now, this is just a rough illustration of the kind of degeneration that I'm talking about, and the insistence that the institutions themselves, the Nigerian university system, particularly the public universities, have undergone, this kind of transformation, where copies of copies, become the standard shaping the research ecosystem. Now, in order to finalize my talk, I'm asking this particular question: why are you still in Nigeria? And I want to close with an autoethnographic narrative. I'm saying that, of course, I want to agree with Aroshegbe again, that Nigeria offers a relevant reference for evaluating the tragedies of the African intellectuals, in their deemed relation with the states. The struggle against the powerful and brutal state has persisted into this era, led to this wave of Nigerian academic Japa, because the Nigerian society has, at worst, failed to evolve into a developmental post-colonial state. At most, it evolved into a kind of developmental post-colonial state which has no role nor need for its brightest minds. Today, Nigerian academics fall into the category which Alback identified as receiving salaries too low to support middle-class lifestyle at local level. The system, of course, is chronically precarized, such that scholars have witnessed the degeneration of their material and work environment conditions and functioning. The lived condition of Nigerian academic service is of a curious elasticity, one that keeps giving way to uncomfortable, degrading, and choking adjustments. They are feeling the chokehold on universities as part of the everyday experience. A portraiture of their lives will show that they receive living wage that cannot sustain life. They also face the burden of expectation, where the structures that should drive the attainment of such expectations are absent. No resources to attend conferences, for instance, but their upward mobility, in their careers is strangely tied to attendance of such meetings. Their working space is not conducive to deep thinking. They borrow to service the public service, and made to feel that investing their blood to improve university ranking is right, just, and worthy. Even after so many years in the system, those in the higher cadre of lectureship feel trapped. They could have left when they had a chance, but here we are. What is more, the precarious intellectuals, are part of the 43% of Nigerian scholars who are concerned about the uncertainty of gratuities and pension payments, and among the 50% who did not have alternative house post-retirement. Given the precarious status of the university itself and the scholars, who are operating within it, young scholars in Nigeria feel concerned and living in a space of intense discomfort. Most of us, I use us here and then also italicize it for emphasis. Most of us are mostly products of copies, and there's Japa pressure that has become difficult to ignore. For instance, if you're a postdoc researcher in South Africa, for instance, you are either unemployed, or in transition to the labor market, to co-nationals who see you. Postdoctoral pursuit is a technique, of course, for these young Nigerians, who are seeing Nigerian universities and travel abroad for postdoc opportunity. It's a technique of uplifting and soothing, their pride. Not just a training opportunity. It is a means to achieve a gara, if we want to use another balance, common in Nigeria. Meanwhile, when they share space with Nigerian Japa community abroad at conferences, at meetings, workshops, and if you like, a feeling of relative deprivation kicks in. The encounter is creating and structuring network of aspiration for young and early career scholars. Academic Japa stories, of course, continue to also circulate in the zone of discomfort that they occupy. Through the stories, they learn about rewards for publishing in high-impact journals, for instance, what is available for supporting publishing, meritocracy issues, and then, if for whatever reason they are unable to meet the highest standard, of publishing, are not doing exceptionally well, quote unquote, your take home will surely take you home. So when people ask young Nigerian academics, the question, why are you still in Nigeria? What kind of response should they provide besides waiting to Japa? With this, I would like to say thank you for listening, and I welcome comments and questions. Thank you.
Kudus, thank you very much. If you could stop sharing your screen, that's great. Then I can say a few things before opening up to questions, because you did a really excellent job there with lots of great visuals to capture the sort of the post-colonial history of Nigeria, and you're right to trace it back. And there's a historian called Tim Livesey who wrote a book called The University Age about Ibadan in its founding years, and he points out that some of these struggles around university governance, around student union activism, date back to the 60s. As the tensions around federalism play out within institutions. So I think you did a great job there of showing us the long history, and then you also you brought out the importance of these unions and the sort of destructive cycle, the destructive spiral that that politics of opposition has led to. And right now in the UK, I'm sure some of our colleagues will be very aware, but if you're in the UK, Nigerian students are now the third largest international group of students, and they doubled in number in the last 5 years in the UK. And partly because of the ways in which student visas are working, this potentially is going to create a whole new backlash in the UK as well. So I think you're very much pointing into an accelerating Japa, it seems to me. And almost by your argument that as you destroy the academic capacity of the universities in Nigeria through this oppositionalism, then Japa happens ever younger. So I'd be interested to know whether you would comment on that, whether actually you need to leave before you've got your degree. You can't rely necessarily on, this community of academic diaspora are very highly educated in Nigeria, but will that change? Will increasingly people try and leave earlier and earlier? And then, of course, my question really is, and you posed it to us as well. You said, what do I say? Staying in Nigeria, what do I say? And I guess my question would be, if you were a policymaker in Nigeria, in the higher education ministry, what would they say to this? And have there been any attempts at doing what other countries have done, like in India, where you try and attract back sort of diaspora through visa deals, or you create centers of excellence and put a lot of money in a few places which are much more transnational as institutions? I think it would be interesting before I open up just to see what your reaction to that is in terms of what do you think the policymakers would say if they're in this webinar?
Well, I think thank you, David, for your initial response and comments. I think it's the policymakers, as far as I'm concerned, when Nigeria is concerned, they're not particularly predictable, and I'm not sure what they'll say. But I think the thinking, and as we saw in the last strike that lasted like 8 months, is the adversarial approach to this issue, and one begins to ask whether or not it's about disinterest, in like, or maybe this disregard, for the crisis, whether it's something they bother about at all, and increasingly, I also think that it's about silencing, of scholars and those who are vocal. They want them to leave, and have like a docile academy, and which of course I see that the trend, the dangerous trend, not just of course in the larger society, but of course if you track back within the system, you can also see it happening in relationship between university administrators and even students. So you begin to worry whether or not those who seek freedom, which are prepared to give freedom, of speech and freedom of thinking. So it is hard to really say what the policymakers would think, outside of we don't have money and things like that. So yeah, and then of course, whether or not people will leave early and early, I think that is part of what is happening, because due to, of course, internet access and a lot of this, people are increasingly realizing there's a whole lot of opportunities, for brilliant young students, to move. And there's a whole movement around that. If you are familiar, if you follow these issues on Twitter, on LinkedIn, there's a whole lot of seminars being organized, on how to coach young Nigerians to actually make this move. So there's a whole movement around that. And as you can see from some of the posters that I shared, people actually take this seriously, and there's a whole celebratory kind of system around it as well. Now, the last issue around whether or not they're trying to track back and trying to encourage, of course, there's a LEADS program, the linkage program, which Nigeria University Commission has been pursuing for a while. Where they encourage Nigerian scholars and attach them to diaspora scholars. They bring them in, attach them to universities to serve for maybe between 3 to 12 months, if I'm correct, and they go into all of these universities and all of that. But for me, I think the challenge with that is about the kind of inequalities that is also creating within the system, and the kind of relative deprivation that we are talking about, that how it's going to worsen it. If people feel like, okay, if I could just cross the border and then come back, in university and earn more money, have more comfort and all of that. Whereas, people who sustain the system on a day-to-day basis, are not accorded the same respect and regard. So I think it's a problematic, approach, to try to address the big problem or the enormous challenge that the university system is facing in Nigeria today.
Thanks, Kudus. The great thoughts, and I think you're capturing what all massified or massifying higher education systems are facing, which is the importance of access and opening up access, but then the question of how you sustain, a research excellence and the costs of that, and the risks then that the system gets more and more stratified just by the fact it gets bigger. And so as you say, how does everyone else benefit if you pay a few academics a lot of money to come back and hold elite research fellowships? I absolutely get that. So I've got some questions coming up, and I'm going to ask people in turn to come forward and ask the questions if they would. Pete, do you want to come in first?
Sure. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Very interesting. I was struck by the notion of a curious elasticity. And of course, one of the elasticities that Nigeria still has, and a lot of places in the world don't, is that it still has a reasonable birth rate, and it's still, for a couple of generations into the future, is growing internally. And we hear a lot about brain drain and other kinds of migration out of Nigeria, but we also hear a lot about transmigration within Nigeria from the countryside into the cities, including in search of educational opportunities, professional opportunities, etc. Do you see that transmigration as a kind of internal brain drain, or simply as some kind of elasticity, perhaps, within the country?
Now, I think classic. Thank you, Pete, for raising that question. I think the classic urban studies ideas will tell you that people go to where they can fare better, you know, and this is happening at different scales. So whatever is happening, you know, in Nigeria is also a reflection of these kind of process. And people who move, of course, we also know in migration literature that people who travel transnationally, you know, a lot of them start their travel from within, moving from rural to urban, or moving from one urban area to another, you know, in order to get prepared and live. So there's a whole process, you know, of these, but it's not. I don't think it's particularly a brain drain concern, you know, in the technical sense. But of course, one can think about it as such, you know, in this context, because those places that have been left behind, there are consequences for them, whether or not they will be able to build their economies, they'll be able to build their larger social structures, you know, in a way that are resilient. Absolutely. So there's a way that one could think about it, you know, in that brain drain terms. But I don't know. It's a conceptual stretch, but you know, worthy of exploration. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I have a few more questions, and then I'll come to Mansour with your hand up. Thank you. Ayab, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Kudus. For me, I'm more interested to know the political economic dynamics of this less functional system. I somehow agree with some of the original functionalist theory that something exists because it serves certain kind of purpose. And I think there is some kind of, there will be multiple actors at the local level, at the national level, and the international level, who benefit from this kind of system that you portrayed very eloquently. So who, if you can, who are the key actors that are benefiting from this system, from this failure, who are contributing for its sustenance, so that we identify the power dynamics, both the economic and political power involved in this process, so that if there's any intention of, you know, changing the system, so that we can identify where the power lies in sustaining the system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ayub, for this important question. Absolutely, the political economy of this whole process. Of course, I didn't delve into that because, like, it's a big conversation that has been had over and over. And part of the struggle, you know, for ASU, following at least from the 1980s, you know, particularly around the structural adjustments, you know, where the issue of defunding of higher education, you know, became a thing, and is still sustained, you know, into the current era. You know, it's at the heart of that, you know, how the World Banks, the IMFs, and the rest of them, you know, sort of like push these policies. And somehow these ideas have been sustained, you know, because the conversation now began to shift to issue of relevance. You know, what do you do? What can you do? And now the question of relevance are being raised in a context where the structures to advance relevant research are not in place. So this there's that dire situation. Of course, private universities, as I showed you, have also emerged in large number over the years, and we've also seen a situation where policies are being changed, in terms of requirement to enter universities, so that a lot of those applicants, who want to get into public universities because of funding and all of that, are getting into the private establishments. And if you have a precarity system, for instance, so there's a whole problem about accreditation of programs, and you find a lot of people who currently have a job in public universities serving as ad hoc staff, so that they can get accreditations and all of that. So there's a whole system, that's sustained. I don't think if anyone has good, deserving, income, and where they can do research, would subject themselves to this kind of structure. So these are there, they know it, they are familiar with it. The University Commission knows this is happening, but I don't know what's happening in terms of response. And of course, the state politics, the political class, are also there, because part of the issue that the academic union has raised over time, is how the while impoverishing academics and letting the university go down the drain, politicians keep sending their kids abroad and everything for education and all of that. So I think there's a whole also system of society-wide domination, where only the elites, or it can replace, the elites, so and where you have a system of silencing, being strengthened in that regard, you keep having this kind of repetitive struggle that, in the large scale, lead to decline of universities. Of course, this whole issue of during the last strike, we had this whole issue about IPPIs, the particular payment system, and part of the argument of ASU is also that who is benefiting from this payment system if we can get something cheap, and design it from the universities, So these are all issues, and you don't get to. I mean, you are not sure, why the insistence on pauperizing the intellectual class. So thank you, Ayo, again.
Great, thank you, Ayo. Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because you would think that potentially universities could be seen as contributors to the economy rather than drains on it, but that fundamentally changes how you think about the university, I guess, in this context. Okay, so next, Mofiyesada Mubwali. Have I lost you? Mubwali, okay. Perhaps, in which case, Adam, do you want to come in? Oh, are you there? No, Adam, can you come in next?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Adebayo, for your presentation. So my question is, basically, I would just directly ask my question. So basically, why would academics stay in Nigeria when there's no professional, economic, or academic freedom incentive for them? So I'm especially wondering, trying to see if there are reasons to go beyond the moral obligation of look, I could help my country by being here. So I'm just wondering if there are any other incentives that you have observed for people to stay, especially when they are not being able to meet the financial responsibilities and aspirations and expectations of their career.
Okay. Thank you, Adam Singh. So for me, I won't particularly say staying. I would say hibernating, particularly for young people. I think, having something, a bed in hand, it's worth something, So I see a lot of young people who are entering the academic, the space newly, just hibernating, until they get that opportunity and all of that. And we also see that people, who are increasingly applying for a second PhD, so that they can make that trip, to Australia, to Canada, and all of that, and start their life over again. You see people, of course, who are also coming in for a master's program, and there's a whole lot of debate about that in the UK. Where already established people, are coming in for graduate programs and the rest. So why stay? Of course, this is a complex question, for people, because at that realm you'll be because at that stage you'll be going into the realm of human motivation. Basically there's a psychology of attachment and homeliness and all of that. And it also depends on the kind of space that you're working in. It depends on the kind of your cadre level, that you are in your career and all of that. Whether or not, asking yourself whether or not it is worth it to leave at this particular time. For me, one of the things that I've been interested in recently is how to begin to archive memory or witnessing decline. How do people who chose to stay, say in the 70s and 80s, how have they processed decline, and how have they adjusted, and the way they treat their wonderment of what the system had become. Obviously, it wasn't as bad as then as it is now. How do they manage that? Because I also see that as I see it as burdensome, having to witness whatever is happening now, and see it as an aspect of institutional victimization, for people who have stayed. Of course, it's something that I'm still exploring. Not started yet, but yeah, thanks for asking that.
Well, yes, big difficult questions. Mansour. Mansour Muratala, do you want to come in and ask a question?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I want to appreciate Kudus Adebayo for the wonderful presentation. Well, my question is this, that Kudus, don't you think the Nigerian university system problems should not be limited to government alone? Do you consider the aspect of the university administrators and the academics themselves? I want you to look at the perspective of the university administrators and even the union at the local level. Please, I want you to comment on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think, I mean, as you understand, there's a whole lot of discussions to be had around this broad issue, and there's a whole lot of actors involved and all of that. So what I've tried to emphasize in this work is the struggle, that keep producing degeneration, and precarization. And so is that line of thoughts that I just try to emphasize in this presentation. But of course, it's not just about government. There are internal governance system, that are worth addressing. I mentioned one the other time about whether or not a system and a scholarly body, they're trying to ask for freedom, whether or not they grant the same freedom, say, for instance, to students and things like that. Because at times I often think that perhaps the university as the administrative cadre of most Nigerian universities have sort of internalized this whole idea of adversarial relationship, which they now use, in not just against other academics, but also to students. So I'm wondering how that kind of system can actually work or negotiate, from that point of view. And of course, unions, I mean, the issues have been raised many times, whether or not union needs to change, whether there's an approach that it could better adopt to advance its cause, given the changes that have been happening, and whether or not the kind of agitations that they have, all the things that they tag around it, whether or not there's need to track back, maybe leave some and address some and all of those, whether or not the generation that is leading, the unions, can actually meaningfully address the material condition, of being a scholar in Nigeria today. So these are all issues, but I mean, there's a whole lot of conversation to be had around that. But I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Monsieur. And you pointed into an interesting issue, Kudus, don't you, about that union activism probably depreciates in effectiveness over time, perhaps because people find ways around it. Anyway, let's go on. Jay, Toby Alaka, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Kudus for a great presentation. I just wanted to volunteer my observation, and part of that is to speak of an observation from what I would consider as movement and cycles. So when Kudus was speaking earlier about the Japa movement, in my own stock of trade, we understand that sometimes you have what you might call a bull market, and you might have a bear market. And from everything that we've heard today and from what we've all experienced around here, you know that Nigeria at the moment, you might describe it as a bit of a distressed security. But what interests us is what the future looks like. So what it looks like 18 months from now, what it looks like 24 months from now, 36 months from now. We know that there are critical events and moments in every system that could potentially engineer a turnaround. So we're heading into an election year, 2023, that could be critical. So I'm very interested in the current sentiments that we have right now, the kind of outflow, but I'm also interested in what other possibilities might be at the moment, somewhat hidden, because those are the things that I guess people on the macro aspect gets really excited about, to say, is there something that we're missing here, in all of this? So I think that this makes for an interesting conversation, but even much more, I think it also presents perhaps an opportunity for different actors to maybe looking to see what could be done differently in a situation that might seem otherwise really despairing like this one. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. I think that's a general comment, and I quite agree with you that there's a possibility of the emergence of a transformative agents, or the agency of transition, when it comes to politics. So I quite agree to that possibility. But what I've really done is to track back historically and see what's been happening in terms of the resolve. Sometimes I see that as a resolve. It's more like a beat down. On the class. Where particularly there's a whole state machinery behind you. To have your way and all of that. I'm not sure what the end game is. I'm not sure what the end game is. We are all still observing. But I particularly look forward to the kind of change, or transformations that would arise, from the few months ahead. Thanks, Toby.
So you were given a chance to end with an upbeat thing, but you didn't. So yes, that's a bleak assessment, but it's still, you're absolutely right. It's really uncertain. Last question then, if we may, from Oluwatoyin Smithun.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much, Kudus, for your presentation. And this is probably a comment and not a question, because I feel like maybe 20 minutes is not enough to talk about the whole Japa movement and everything, but I think that right now, the framing of Japa movement, you're probably looking at it as a pull factor and not considering like the push factor, in the sense that, what about academics who do not have opportunities in Nigeria, which may be one of the reasons why they are trying to get out of the country? What would you say about that? So even for those who have opportunities, what about those who are being pushed out for other reasons? So are those things you would consider? And I think some people have also asked some questions regarding that, like, because when we are talking about migration, we need to look at like the individual reasons and also contextual reasons. And we know that people want to move for, like, moving is usually not the first option for a lot of people. It's as a result of something pushing you or something pulling you towards the destination. So I think something to consider is moving sometimes is not an easy decision for a lot of people, especially academics in their home country, which would be the comfort zone. And we know that for people who have chosen to stay in academia, it's for passion most of the time. And these are people who must have thought it through before going into that field. So something to consider in the Japa movement is like what could be the factors pushing them away. Maybe those factors are actually bigger than the factors pulling them to the other side, because it means, like you said, they have to start all over again. Starting a new PhD, starting a new master's are not easy choices. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Shane, thanks. I agree that that's a comment and something to think about. I do not take lightly the complexity of migration and decision making around migration, but also to just highlight that in my presentation, it was just about trying to look at even the situation of those who are currently, within the system and departing, and young, particularly, early careers who are getting into that system and what they are witnessing. So I take this from my encounter recently at an African Studies meeting, where we're having conversation around the so-called diaspora thing and return and stuff like that, particularly in the academia. And they said, look, to come and do what? When the states can treat scholars like the way they've been doing, why would I come there? So I see this whole issue about how this so-called the Japa movement itself, is not just affecting those who are leaving, but also who are currently there, and whether or not it could shape their desire to come back or to even participate in whatever way. So, but I also not ignore the complexity around even the larger social structure and macro and micro economic factors, that shape our migration decision. I don't take that lightly at all. But just don't have enough time to delve into that in the presentation. So thanks, Jay, for your comments.
Yes, that was a great final question and response. I remember doing a workshop once where someone drew migration for me, and they drew a picture of themselves on a plane they were going to Scandinavia, and there was a baby falling out of the back of the plane. And it was that cost, that human cost of leaving your family behind, which is one of these things that we haven't really talked about, but it's the things you have to leave in order to travel. So thank you all very much. Great questions. It's been a pleasure to host you, Kudus. You've done a great job with some really thoughtful interventions and left us lots to think with. Thanks everyone who asked questions. We would love you to come back for our final webinar in this series next Tuesday. But of course, please come to any webinars. And if you'd ever like to give on yourself, then get in touch, and it would be great to carry on these conversations at many points in the future. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.